So welcome everyone to the Verisian Community Podcast, episode 2. So firstly, just as a little bit of introduction, if this is your first time listening to us, we see the Verisian Community Podcast as a platform dedicated to explore and discuss advancements in technology in healthcare. And the goal for us is really to share knowledge and insights from across the industry, from experts like currently my friends Oliver and Kyle for today's podcast, with a particular emphasis on the integration of technology in clinical trials. And the goal here for us is with the podcast is really to create a community by bringing people together virtually, like in this podcast, but later also in person. And one of our main aims here is to encourage open dialogue about innovative solutions, industry trends, and the future of technology in healthcare. And today, the topic is open source. And especially in clinical analysis, it's a hot topic with people that have big backgrounds in open source and others that have less so, but have heard a lot about it and are open to learn. But obviously time is limited, and it's important to more know where to prioritize. Now, before getting started, I'd love for the both of you to introduce yourself. So we're here with Kyle from Syneos and Oliver from Bayer. I hope that I can both call you my friends. We've known each other for quite a couple of months. Kyle, I met you in August in Silicon Valley. The weather was beautiful. Today here in London, it's not so beautiful. And Oliver, I've met you a couple of times in Berlin, back in the offices at the Bayer offices. But Kyle, would you mind just sharing a little bit to our listeners, a little bit about your background? You're relatively new to the industry, so you got a really interesting perspective to give as an outsider. And give us a little bit of your insights and your impressions of the industry as you see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in my personal opinion, I feel very new to the industry. I've been here for just shy of a year. Started with Syneos last December. My background is a little bit unusual. I got my neuroscience PhD from UC Davis between 2015 and 2020. I did a postdoc there for a year and a half focused on data science, but purely in a preclinical setting. Like we're talking like very basic, like potential drug target discovery, but frankly, it was just very basic research. And that was great, but I transitioned to biotech about a year and a half ago. I worked with a medical device startup in the Bay Area for 6 months. But I have a personal value of wanting to work with R, using it in a useful way, working with data science and helping people. So when I found, this job opportunity that came up with Syneos, it just felt like a really natural alignment with my personal interests, my professional background, and just the values that we share in common. So yeah, it's been a crash course. I basically learned SAS in the last year, and I've delivered, all the statistical programming deliverables from SDTM to TLGs. And I'm also really lucky to be involved in some early projects using R, which we don't have to get into all the specifics, but I'm super excited about that potential, and that's why I'm excited to talk with you about this. And yeah,
I appreciate it. Thank you for that, Kyle. And Oliver, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, you've got so much experience, so much expertise at Bayer. You've seen so many different things. Tell us a little bit, tell our listeners a little bit about your background and some of the things that you're seeing currently in this particular part of the industry.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. First of all, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, my name is Oliver Wirtz. I'm a biologist by training. I'm in the industry since 2001, so it's quite a while. Actually, I started off as a CRA, so clinical research associate. I was traveling to sites, checking CRFs, starting on paper CRF and then switch later on to electronic CRFs, of course. After a couple of years, I was able to switch to data management. I was a data manager for a couple of years and built databases, did data entry myself for phase 1 trials, clean data, send queries, and so on and so forth. And then I learned SAS and started as a statistical programmer, first in a smaller pharma company. And then, finally, I ended up at Bayer, and now I'm here working with a small team and work more in the area of analysis standards and reporting quality. So I've seen a couple of things, but I have to say I'm not using open source software so much for myself, but it's of course a big topic at the moment.
And that's why I was so excited actually to bring the both of you together, because obviously you both come from the industry from such different perspective, but that's sort of the exact gathering of people that have to work together to progress in the industry, because it can't happen with you, Oliver. It can't happen without you, Oliver, sorry. And it needs fresh ideas that, well, need to be tested whether they work or not, because maybe things don't work out, of course. So I want to start with the first question for you, Oliver. So in general, from your perspective, and I know you're not an expert on open source, but I know you've talked a lot about it. We've spoken a lot about it as well. So I'm curious to know, how do you see the challenges and the opportunities of open source solutions generally within the clinical analysis reporting space?
I mean, of course, there are opportunities. Every time you see it that a statistical procedure is already available in R, or is available overall and not available in the statistical software you're currently using, you want to use the other, the open source version, name it R, and want to use it to do your analysis and make use it right away if your current platform doesn't provide it. And it's also, of course, a good opportunity for somebody who's fresh from university or not familiar with SAS, but has good R knowledge to use R right away if R is provided in the environment or in the company you're joining. But all in all, it's got, of course, its challenges. If you have to manage more than just one platform, you will have at least double the work. You need to validate these systems. You need to maintain them. You need to set up processes that allow you to use both software side by side. You need to have somebody who is able to validate programs that somebody else has written. You need to be able to understand them a couple of years later when the people have left the company. So all the stuff that you may face with one platform, you will have at least the same way when you have a second or third or fourth platform available. And of course, you have to deal with the knowledge and the training of staff. People need to be able to use these new softwares. And what can you do if you have a mixed team where one of the team members is only familiar with SAS or is not as good in R, and vice versa? How do you deal with that? So these are the first challenges I could think of.
So I hear a lot of sort of the human challenges of just introducing new software and just making sure people have the right skills, knowledge transfer, and all of that. What do you think of that, Kyle? How do you see the opportunities and challenges of open source and clinical reporting and analysis?
Oh, I think Oliver gave a really good summary that hit on a lot of the key points. And this is like what I see playing out in practice on the ground as well. Talk about a unique piece from my perspective is so I came into the field recently and I seeded this idea, but I didn't know SAS when I started my job, but I've been making deliveries in SAS, throughout, this whole last year. So what I find to be maybe like a confusing part in the point of discussion is the focus on R versus SAS specifically, because I don't think changing the syntax is the biggest difference. Actually, the majority of the issues that we're seeing are the process-oriented situations, which are related to R because you're changing a system that's SAS-centric to R-centric. But you could make the syntax agnostic. You could use different open source languages, for example. But it's the setup of the environment to host these, which is a little different from SAS Studio, the traditional SAS-centered platforms. But you could make it, R, Python, Julia. So I guess I just want to be clear on that. And when it comes to training people, I feel like we're burning a lot of time and spinning our wheels worrying about training people to become R users from SaaS users, when frankly, the best way to learn is by practicing and doing projects. And I don't mean to be dismissive of the challenges or the concerns that come with that, because I don't think you're going to overnight become an expert and be as successful or productive right away. So I think you have to start small, like with pilot projects and, maybe a limited number of data sets. But like, I've always learned programming. I learned R just by practice, by building things. I've learned SaaS by practice and building things and doing that in this new environment, learning all the systems and processes, which it's not easy coming in and learning it as things are, right, for new people.
Of course,
so it's going to be hard either way.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it's a challenge, if people are familiar with a given process to change to a new one. But the challenge for me in the open source space, as much as I'm excited about it and passionate, is that we don't have a clear process to provide everybody. We do not yet have a clear path. Everyone is doing things a little bit differently. And the key is really the human perspective and communication, from my point of view, like really getting people on the same page about the strategy.
I mean, the feeling that I get also coming a little bit from the outside is that it almost feels like it's SaaS versus everyone else, when in fact it shouldn't be this way, because in any other software engineering industry, I mean, yes, some companies may favor some languages over the others, but surely there should be a choice of options. If you have an infrastructure, a good statistical computing environment that gives you an option of languages, or at least frameworks that you can use that give you access to libraries, open source libraries, and all, that makes it at least the perception of this tension between SaaS developers and non-SaaS developers as being inherently zero sum, when in fact it should be the exact opposite of that, right?
I think we're currently talking about clinical studies, right? So when you're working on clinical studies, you want to submit the data to authorities, you want to get your submission. And for that, you need to use a computerized system that's validated. Of course, you can use whatever you like for everything else. But I think especially for the clinical trials, this is one of the big hurdles, probably the biggest that you have to master. And I mean, if you come into an organization that's working with SaaS for, 20 years or longer, you will find a big system of macros of everything has been solved somehow, more or less. You do not want to do all your routine work and use a completely new system for that. Why should you do that? A clinical study is more or less a mass product. The workflow is always the same. That we have somehow managed to get a fairly standardized system to get standard data sets. Many companies have their standard tables, listing, figure sets, and all of them just want to use or want to get through it relatively easily without too much effort. Everybody wants to understand what's going on, and so you're using the resources you simply have. And changing that may be difficult. If you're working in a biotechnology startup that has nothing available and you can start completely from scratch, it's probably completely irrelevant which software you're using. You may want to use Python or R or whatever the people that found the company have at hand or are experts for. So, yeah, it's probably a bit unfair, but that's the way it is, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree in the sense that there will be an upfront investment, and the benefits of open source are really in the long run. Upfront, there is a cost, right, in terms of the commitment, in terms of the financial dedication of resources, and in getting connected with the right people. And like, I want to be really frank with that because I don't want anybody to feel surprised. It's not like we're saying like, oh, we're just going to roll in and just, rewrite everything overnight. From my perspective, it's really about a culture change, and it's about getting people to embrace a progressive mindset about buying into a new system. When we get things built, there will be a payoff. One of the big ones, and I respect SAS as a language because I see its power. I see the library of knowledge that has been built up and the expertise of all the programmers. But frankly, you're paying a license to use SAS, right? At all of your big companies. And this can be super expensive. That's a cost that if you can make the initial investment to switch to the open source ecosystem, you won't have to pay anymore. So there are dividends there. I also want to give credit to SAS, the company, which is selling these licenses. I understand people like the security that comes with them backing the validation of their system, right? And I know they are promoting a new platform. I'll say it by name because everyone will know SASBIA, where it's language agnostic, where it's validated and you can use open source systems. However, that's still going to be licensed, right? And you don't necessarily have to pay that license if you can build your own ecosystem. It's just the way that you do that will rely on so much communication between people at different companies. It's going to rely on so much cooperation. That's really fundamental to the art community in particular, from all of my experience and all the people I know. But yeah, we're going to have to work together on it.
And Oliver, on that note, because that is really, really interesting. And if you hear SAS speak, and I've seen their talks at the Fuse conferences and some of the public announcements, it is heavily based to it. The message is that SAS is here to stay, and because SAS is the platform to use open source technologies, that seems to be a focus that I've seen play over and over again, which makes sense if I was SAS, obviously. But on your side, Oliver, how would you create trust with people that have people that are responsible for processes that have been put in place over decades that clearly work? You shouldn't replace something just for the sake of replacing it. But how would you prove that something is worth making that effort? The famous saying that no one gets fired for buying IBM. It's part of that elusive, because you moving to an open source system, or at least opening a process that's so fundamental to the delivery of submissions. How do you convince internally the ROI of that? Because it's not immediate. It's something a lot more abstract. What do you think of that, Oliver?
I don't know what I would do. At the moment, I've not been in the situation, and maybe it's not really. It's not really worthwhile to discuss what would happen if SAS would go away and we're just allowed to use R. I think we will survive in the end. It's not like you cannot learn R and do all the things you used to do in SAS in R. It's just, in the end, clinical studies or clinical study submissions are more than just programming and writing code and so forth. It's probably not even really important to be an expert at all languages. Maybe that is not possible at all to be an expert for coding. It's probably more important that you know what you have at hand at every point in time, that you know about what your code is doing, basically. You need to know what to do when you get code from the outside. Although this may be SAS code, it may be completely different to what you're used to see. You need to know how you want to handle a study that you have never seen before, but the study lead has left the company. You need to take over the code, and you need to know very quickly where the vulnerabilities are, where you need to rerun code when you get new data, how you need to improve the code. All these questions, they are all the same if you use an open source software or SAS. All these problems of pharmaceutical programming are not solved if you use one or the other. It's especially not solved when you're using open source. The overall community may be a bit younger overall. Things have changed dramatically in terms of how people interact. We've got GitHub. This was not really common a couple of years ago, but nowadays people got so used to get access to a GitHub location, and then they start collaborating. Maybe the pandemic has its part in this equation. before that, people were lucky when they were allowed to go to Fuse conference and discuss and meet their colleagues from other companies, and then they presented their piece of code that they had developed during the past year. This is somehow not. This is totally old school somehow, right? Because now you have other possibilities to do that, and so it's overall it's completely fine to collaborate, and that the R community is now working on the Admiral Dev package. This is also something that we haven't seen before, and also not, and nobody has started the same project for SaaS. I mean, that would have been possible as well. So it's somehow I think it's really cool. I'm happy that people are open to use open source. That it's possible to use open source next to SaaS is even better, because then I can still I can use it and still understand what's going on. So it's perfectly fine. But I think that clinical programming nowadays needs a bit more than just knowledge about how to code. You need to be a very good project manager to know when you have to do what in during the course of the trial.
So there's another side to open source that I think we should also touch upon, which is all the different open source LLM models, because and the rise of generative AI and how to find a way to generate trust within big pharma, but this is a general concern for any big enterprise of the applicability of LLMs and AI in general at the clinical analysis space. What's your take on that, Kyle? I mean, everyone's got an opinion these days about it, but what do you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just want to cover a couple points as well. I neglected to mention that now there have been at least 2 big drug submissions or trial reports to the FDA using open source. So Novo Nordisk made a big splash with their NDA, and Roche released a press presentation, I think just yesterday, that they reported the results of a phase 3 trial using open source methods. And where there's 2, there will be more. So validation is hard. It is hard work. And I know that they've invested in their individual approaches. I would love to have a more standardized, like industry-wide method for how you do that validation, because that's going to be a critical step to get more people on that pathway. But ultimately, the other point I wanted to make is that the people are the most valuable part of our industry. It's the domain expertise and the experience, knowing what to do. And, I program outputs in SAS and R, but when I have a question about programming in R, I can handle the syntax, but I reach out to the experienced SAS programmers on my team for how we make decisions about how to deal with derivations or resolve discrepancies and ambiguity. And we always rely on communication between, programmers, study leads, leadership, et cetera. Like, you have to have people working together. And this brings me to AI, because AI will not replace people, because it can't do all the communication parts that a person can do. I really like the way that you, Thomas, and Henning and Verisian has talked about the potential of AI, because you're clear about the potential upside, but also the specific scope of its application. AI is great for the parameter space that human beings have mapped already. It's not great at extrapolating beyond that. In that sense, it can't replace human ingenuity. I haven't seen a paradigm yet that allows that to be possible. I'm not going to rule out a sci-fi future, because clearly, things can happen that surprise us. But I think it's useful and transformative in the way that Google is essential and transformative to the way that I program, because I'll just Google every single step. I did that to learn R, I did that to learn SAS, and you add LLMs into the equation, it's like an empowered Google search in certain ways. And it's nascent, but I think there's a really nice empowering payoff for experienced programmers to save time, and for new programmers to have boilerplate code, big chunks of code delivered as a template, as a starting point. But you still need the human expertise to tie it together.
Well, beautifully said, and Kyle. And I'm dying to hear what your take on this is, Oliver.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you want to write a piece of code and you don't know how it's done, then AI is great to get you on the right path. Even the code is often way better than you probably would have done it by yourself. So this is really great, and but it's not really implementing AI, really, is it? So it's just like Googling, and you still need to copy paste your result. I think we still don't know what else we could really do with AI for tasks that are at the moment very cumbersome, like I don't know, synchronizing your specifications with your metadata and the code and the documentation you need around it. There's probably a potential to use AI to help with that, so that the documentation is somehow written in the back end using the code you've already written, that you have a code analyzer that is picking up the important pieces and puts them into a Word document, so that you don't need to do that by yourself when you're writing the ADRG, for example. So these kinds of things I would like to have, if that is possible at all. Stealing code and copy pasting code that has been around anyways. Well, I don't know. A couple of years ago, you were Googling it and got, and when you were lucky, you got a nice paper. You were crawling Lex Janssen's homepage and pick up a few papers, and then you copy pasted the code. I think there's nothing bad about it to do that, of course. So I just wanted to say, all in all, I again have to say I'm not an expert for that. So there may be others who have already a good idea of how they want to use AI.
But I mean, I think ultimately it's not going to be one person that is going to decide. It's going to be an incremental step change of people like yourself that think, okay, actually, maybe we could use it for this. And then you have a conversation. They think, okay, actually, let's go into that direction. And ultimately that grows exponentially. And then that determines the direction of how the industry thinks about it. What's really interesting for me personally, I've been around AI for a long time, and in a way, I thought we had sort of peak AI already, sort of 10 years ago, with machine learning coming around, and I've done a lot especially my last company, on the symbolic artificial intelligence side, which is the sort of what's also referred to as good old fashioned AI, which is the symbolic, deterministic, rule-based systems, which I generally still believe have a massive role to play, especially if you're working in a regulated environment. And so it's fascinating to see AI sort of back again with a vengeance, and everyone's just talking about it. And I can't help but just feel deja vu, because it does feel we were here not too long ago, but at a smaller scale. It just feels we're at an order of magnitude bigger. And I think primarily my opinion on this is that ChatGPT, whatever you think of the transformer and the architecture of how it's built, is that it allowed people to dream of what an actual AI system would be, and it gave the dream to someone who just doesn't know about computer science, because you're able to interact with a computer in a way that feels human, and despite all of the shortcomings, hallucinations, all of that, it allows us to actually, in my view, carve or stimulate that imagination, that emotional side of human beings, that also gives rise to all the fears around AI and all the debates on trust. So that's, I think, what I find fascinating of the past 1 year, because it's been just over 1 year that ChatGPT was released, which is bizarre if you think about it.
Oh, I just feel like Oliver raised some really good points in his commentary on this. And, it's interesting because I do think there's great potential for AI, like in the near to like short-term future, like generating blocks of code, or frankly, translating blocks of code, like going from SAS to R or vice versa. Look, the truth is I used it to understand what SAS programs were doing by taking blocks of code, right? Nothing like confidential, obviously, you have to be careful with that. But you could also imagine a lot of like big companies could have their own secure like ChatGPT agent, basically, or an API that plugs into their programming environment. and it should help human understanding. The other point I wanted to make is that like the potential for AI is big, it's growing, but it's still like a little ways off, right, to really manifest. In the near term, there's so much work and so much potential just with continuing to computerize and make machine readable all the different parts of a study, and particularly linking like metadata to programming, right? Because there are so many pieces of the programming job where like I'm flipping between a programming script and like an Excel spreadsheet. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that like really boggles my mind. Like from a human like workflow perspective, I don't think it's ideal. Like there must be ways to link all of our systems. It doesn't even take AI, right? But it will take designing a comprehensive like interactive development environment specifically catered towards clinical programming, clinical data reporting, right? So dealing with like information security, like these are all challenges, but just making the computer be able to read everything else that's on your computer and be able to automatically ingest pieces that are like one-to-one relationships, right? Where you can just draw a line from here to here. Like you shouldn't have to have a person like manually transfer that. And in fact, like that's where, even though you have human experts, that's inviting like more risk for error by, copying and pasting or like typing something wrong, right? So like that's where I actually feel like the greatest yield for change in like the next year within the industry, and credit to CDISC and like COSA and many other companies who are moving towards a metadata automation like perspective. People are working on this, but like I think that's going to yield like really good benefits for people. Then eventually you can scaffold AI, LLM code generation and code interpretation on top of that. Like that's what I see in the next, 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Cal. How do you see that, Oliver? Would you see the same, or would you add anything to that?
I would like to see that, I have to say. I mean, a couple of interfaces already exist. So I know that when it's not really a big deal. It depends a bit on how you set it up, but you can translate metadata into code directly, or make use of metadata to give you some automated code writing. You do not need AI for that. But what I find really cumbersome is getting all the documentation done and keep it in sync with what you're doing. So at the moment, you I don't know, you do a progression-free survival analysis, and you have to write down all the censoring, and you have to implement it in the code. First of all, you need to translate it somehow from the sub in your code, and then you need to again translate it into something human readable into your ADRG. So the reviewer's guide to further explain how the analysis was done. This is really hard to keep in sync when things change. And if you had a computerized system that reads it out for you and does it all for you, that would of course be a great thing. And probably this is one of the domains where I would like to see AI. I don't know if I would trust an AI that does everything from tomorrow onwards. Everything is done by an AI. It's writing the code and does the analysis all in one. I probably won't trust that right now, at least. But I think these are domains where you still need to invest a lot of time doing manual, boring work that is very cumbersome and error prone. And this is what I want to overcome with AI, or would like to see overcome.
Okay, gentlemen. We at Verisian hope to contribute to some of those things that you guys said, certainly when it comes to building products, in the move to transition to open source, or at least enabling that infrastructure to make those transitions, as well as the AI. I realize we started with a strong focus on open source, and I think the main thing I think we can all agree in is that ultimately it's about the people involved, and whatever language you use, it's ultimately just syntax, and ultimately it's about having the right people onboarded. And I guess if R allows newer people to enter the industry because people love to use R, then I would guess that's just a really good thing. But obviously they cannot work without the expertise and the experience of people that obviously know SaaS and have been around there for a while. So with that, you guys have any final comments to our listeners before we wrap up this second episode?
I hope that in 5 years' time, we do not need to talk about open source, whether or not it's useful anymore,
Yes.
because it has become so common that nobody really worries about it. I wasn't a big fan, I have to say, when I heard about use of open source a couple of years ago. But meanwhile, I mean, you get used to it. It's all manageable.
Yeah. I'd like to echo that because, our discussion is kind of focused on technology and predicated on technology. But I find time and again in data science and in this clinical space, it comes down to communication between people and responsibility of individuals and within an organization. So I don't think those principles ever change. The technology will always change. It will always evolve.
Totally agree. And I would really recommend that before you learn a new programming language, you should probably do a course in project management. I think that is a very good invest.
And with that, I want to genuinely thank Oliver and Kyle for coming on this podcast. Both of you have such different perspective on the same topic, but I'm glad I think we ended up on a very positive and very agreeable note. So I do hope we'll get a chance to meet in person, hopefully soon. And with that, I thank our listeners for staying with us until the very end. So with that, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And I hope to see you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Thomas. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.